Isadora Velazquez. We did this before, and we said we do a part two. So number one, I want to say big thank you for making a comeback and coming back on the podcast. I'm grateful for your time.
That's how much fun it was the first time, so I'm excited to be here.
Yes. I got to ask you off the cuff, is there's a quality about you. Naturally, I reach out to attorneys and I ask them for their time, and you are so quick to respond, to be decisive, to give the windows of time back to me. You usually beat me to the punch in offering the days and the schedule and the time. I did want to ask you, when it comes to being decisive, have you always been that way? Did you build it as a skill? Is that your team? Maybe is it not even you? Tell me about you being decisive. How did that come about?
Well, I think I've always been that way, but when it comes to scheduling, I think the older I get, I notice we get busy. So whenever I know that there's something I want to get done, I try to schedule it right away. Get it done quickly, because I know that if we wait, we're going to get busy, life is going to happen, and it won't get done. So that's the skill that I developed of being decisive to my nature.
Yes, I like it. I respect it so much because I know sometimes my wife and I are having discussions with other couples and we're trying to make plans together, and it's like, oh, well, what time are y'all free? Or no, what time are you free? Or do you like to eat this restaurant? Or do you not? And then so personally, behind the scenes, when there's all this back and forth, it can drive me a little crazy. And I could go, hey.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. So I almost, what I usually do is, I don't give any options, or I give two options, and then I say if those two options don't work, give me two other options. But I think you were quick; you gave three options right off the back. So respect.
You think alike.
All right, I like it. Respect. All right. So let's get into this conversation. I want to ask you. It's a classic conversation about nature versus nurture, and I think when people listen to attorneys like you, and they maybe want their children to come up and be a successful professional. And so this idea of nature versus nurture, this is like, the nature, of course, is that you're kind of this way by design, or is it nurture where no, you were really, the influences around you really crafted you to be this way. Being an attorney is still, there's a prestige to the profession. So when it comes to you, what percentage of you being an attorney would you say is nature, and what percentage of you being an attorney would you say would be nurture?
I know this may sound like a cliche answer, and you probably get it a lot, but I think it's 50-50. I was lucky enough to be born in some circumstances. I have good parents. I was born in a beautiful island, so I'm very proud of where I come from, and that adds to trying to be successful and the ambition of trying to do something with your life. That I think it's more like our nature, where the circumstances around us. Now, in terms of how we are developed, inevitably moving here, having from Puerto Rico to the U.S., having the whole experiences that create you. I know that you mentioned last time that we had spoken about how maybe originally I wanted to be a politician and how life takes in different ways. So it's a mixture of both. It's the way I was raised and a little bit also, I guess it's me and my life experiences. Being an attorney is funny, and TV looks really interesting and glamorous. But you'll see that when you get to the nitty gritty, it's still, I find it interesting, but maybe not as glamorous as the TV likes to portray it. It's still fun though.
Yes. So
fancy.
Unpack the part of it where maybe your family or your parents or your tios, or what part of the nurture can we take? Because I think, as somebody who, there's this concept called like the internal locus of control and external locus of control, and typically people are happier with who have like more of the internal locus of control. And for anybody out there who doesn't know what we're talking about, it's this idea of, do you believe you control, or do you believe you're in control, or do you believe the control is outside of you? In other words, you can't really change your circumstances. But for what's in people's control when it comes to maybe raising their children, or even being a positive influence as an aunt, uncle, cousin, what that 50% side of it that was nurture, what was some of those things, whether it was beliefs they passed on to you, or habits they helped you build. What would you say on that side of the conversation? Would you say like, hey, like my family or my environment nurtured this into me?
Well, I think it's more the more you grow, it's inevitable that you don't want to compare yourself. You want to be yourself, but you look at other people maybe in similar circumstances or in completely different circumstances. And the more I grow, the more I realize how lucky I was in
Yeah.
my upbringing. That's the nurture side. The fact that my parents, of course, are not perfect. No one is, but they were there for me. They supported me. They took me to a good school. They gave me that push that, of course, I compare that particular circumstance with other people in my same exact shoes. And without that huge part in their upbringing, the nurture side, they wouldn't be in the same position. So that's why I consider myself very lucky.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have to confess, I look at colleagues and people who maybe didn't have the same luck I did, maybe not as privileged as I was in terms of my upbringing, who are a lot more successful. So there's a lot of nature that goes into that. But I do believe the nurture part, as you mentioned, the aspect that we can't control and is brought to us, has a lot to do with how I got here and how I continue to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have children, and that's by choice because I worried that maybe I wouldn't be as good as my parents were, or as other parents are. And I do think that's the hardest job in the world, being a parent. But I try to be
Mm.
a good aunt to my nieces and nephews as much as I can, knowing my limits. That nurturing part that
Yeah.
some people have, maybe I'm not there yet. I don't have it.
Sure. No, I respect
I
that. I
try.
respect that. Yeah, no, it is fascinating. I do think about, and what I wonder, because every time I talk to somebody and they have this background, they have one background. So I'll give you one version of it where they would go, oh yeah, in our family. Okay, so I'll give you a specific example. There was a couple my wife and I sat down with at a restaurant, and they're from India, and they were saying, hey, in our household growing up, it was you got to be a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer, and those are the three paths, and that's it. And then I talked to other people who I've interviewed, on the podcast and everything, and they said something similar. Now, that wasn't a message that was common in my family, but it's made me curious for people who've attained one of those three esteemed professions. Was that was that vision casting by the parents, or no? Like your parents were like, hey, you could be whatever we might put on the other side of prestige, a janitor if you wanted to. What was their approach? Was there more pushing or more like, hey, more maybe autonomy with your career choice?
Well, with the career choice, maybe there was autonomy. But what my parents did do, which I think has to do with the fact that I have a younger sibling, I have a baby sister.
Mm.
So it was always that you have to set the example. You have to be the one that
Yeah,
has
yeah,
straight A's, this honor roll, that is amazing at what you do. Which is why, when you have to constantly set the example, in the back of my mind, I'm like setting the examples, always getting good grades, always being the best
yeah.
at least academics, which is really funny because for my sister, it was more like you can enjoy life. The approach with her was a little bit more laid back. And my sister is incredibly artistic. She is a very well-known artist in Philly.
Yeah.
Very different approaches because the approach with me as an older sibling was more good grades, set the example. While with my sister was more be yourself. I do wonder, I must confess from time to time, if I had a chance to maybe not care about my grades as much as I would have been an attorney.
Yeah.
And deep down, now that I'm older, yes, I still think I would have been an attorney, at least
Oh,
in a
yeah, yeah.
degree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it is interesting. And how much of would you say that continues now? Like as far as that idea of example setting, would you say that's still a primary motivator? Maybe not for your sister as much, but for other people who are looking, whether it's women coming up or again Latino women, men coming up. How much of you still has that example setting as a motivator even now?
I think for older siblings, if you ask in general, I will dare generalize that yes, we keep it with us, and I don't notice it until, for example, my baby sister, and she tells me, "Oh, you're trying to be a role model." She's the
Yeah,
one
yeah,
who
yeah,
brings
yeah.
up to my attention when I try to pursue it. So it does linger, it does stay. I've had the luxury of practicing immigration law. Sometimes I feel like, okay, I need to set an example of how life is in the U.S. for my clients, how complicated it may be, the opportunities they may have. We keep it, but I do think this is something that most older siblings will keep with them if that's what was pushed by their
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. It's a fascinating perspective. I think I on that side of it, I have there's 7 of us. I'm one of 7, and there's 5 of us that will be under me. But interestingly, growing up, I don't recall having the thought process of like, hey, be an example. But when I've talked to like my brother who's immediately younger than me, who's 2 years younger than me, he said stuff like, hey, the reason I didn't wild out on drugs and all these things because I had you as an example. So he said things along the way. But interestingly, now I think about that, and probably in an extreme way as far as example setting, that I sometimes have to ask myself, like, hold on, like, I could think so often about the example I'm setting that I wonder sometimes if I'm doing things for the example or because it's actually good and appropriate to do. Let me give you a practical example. So let's say it's going to church. I'm like, okay, would it be better for me to take notes in church or not? And I go, the example is like, oh, take notes so younger people can get more from it. But then it's like, okay, well, that's not like a righteous thing. Nobody's less righteous if they don't take notes. You know what I'm saying? Like there's studies for sure that shows the benefit of taking notes and the more you retain. But like, anyway, I know I could take it to the extreme nowadays, even though it was so disregarded as I was growing up. But anyway, I just wanted to share that to contrast with what you're saying there.
I get it. It happens at my job. I am the business owner, and with my staff, I see myself doing things that I'm like, why am I doing this? Because maybe young subconsciously I'm trying to be the example. So it stays with us.
Yes. Now, the culture in your family, do you think, like, when you look, whether it's at your peer group, I know you mentioned your sister as a well-known artist in Philadelphia. Do you see that across even like with your maybe cousins and beyond, as far as like they seem to be a group of high achievers? Was that a culture of the family?
It's funny, I never noticed it until I started, now, once again, old age is amazing. The older you get, the more I try to interact and keep a close knit with my family. And we're Puerto Ricans, so we are a lot. Very large family all over the island and also here in the U.S. And the more I interact, particularly with my cousins, we're like 50, the more I realize, yeah, we are all subconsciously, or maybe we don't do it on purpose, but we are all motivated and successful. I do think some of it has to do with, how Puerto Ricans are. We're very proud of where we come from. So I do think in my family that has to do with our desire to be successful or to at least feel proud of what we're doing. Maybe not necessarily success, but be proud of what you're doing. Yeah. And I tie it to the island, to where we come from. And no matter where we go, we always try to be proud of everything we represent, everything we do. And that is family-wide.
Yeah, I like it.
That's how we are. That's how we're wired.
Yes. And I think so my wife's half Puerto Rican, so we'll go every 4 years. We actually were just there in January, but she'll joke about the San Antonio, the Puerto Ricans in San Antonio, is you'll always see it on their cars somewhere, or hanging from the windshield, or a sticker on the back, or if somebody's Puerto Rican, you're gonna know it pretty quickly, because there's a good, appropriate pride when it comes from being proud of where you're from.
We say where we're from before we say our names, so that has to do a lot with how we present ourselves. Yeah.
Now, let me ask about, were there any habits that your parents specifically helped you build that you think continue to help you nowadays?
It's silly, but it's a great habit, and I encourage everyone to try it. Prepare the day before. And you may think, it's preparing, for example, for this podcast, going through what we may talk about, be ready to meet with you. But it goes to every detail. For example, I pull my outfit the day before. I'll think, okay, what am I going to wear? I have court. Maybe I should wear this outfit. I know the judge, they like this style. Or I'm meeting with this client. Maybe I should, everything the day before. And it sounds so simple, so silly. It's actually very time consuming, but very helpful, because when the day arrives, you're not as stressed, as overwhelmed. So that tiny habit has been, at least for me, life changing. I've used it since I was little, and now I do it every day. It's just nature. I prepare for everything the day before.
Yes, of respect. Now I like that. It's really simple. It's really practical. It's thinking about your outfit, thinking about your clothes, thinking about your shoes, or whatever it is. Such a basic one, but no, it seems to pay dividends to reduce some of the stress on the day of, because and there's like the lore, I think, when it comes to like the billionaires who like they don't have any time to think, so they like make their outfits super practical. I think like the Steve Jobs and again other individuals that said that they had their maybe it's their Darwinian outfit picked out because there's so many decisions they're processing every single day, and it gets a little overwhelming when you stack a little bit of too many things up all together.
But even to daily life activities, hang out with your girlfriends. I plan my trips with my girlfriends. I love hanging out with them.
Yeah.
If I know we're going to a restaurant, we'll plan ahead of time. What are we doing? What are we wearing? And I haven't planned the day before. We get to enjoy that moment so much more being together.
I like it. I like it. Respect. Okay, let's rewind back to a topic you mentioned in our first episode together. You mentioned that early on you had an ambition for politics. I wanted to ask you, especially when you talk about your nieces and nephews, is it plural on both sides, or is it nieces and nephews?
One niece and 3 nephews.
Okay, niece and nephews. Something I've seen maybe in my own space. We don't have kids either, but I find myself as I think about my nieces and nephews, and I'm thinking about the world that they're going to be coming up in. I find myself thinking more about politics maybe than ever. But I'm curious for you, like especially as you think about that next generation coming up, your nephews, your niece, or any of the kids coming up. Do you ever see yourself in the future going down the road of getting into politics?
So I shared with you that I went to school to study political science because that's what I wanted to do, and then thought I had to be an attorney in order to achieve a career in politics. And it goes back to the same thing, hindsight, and looking back, I still enjoy politics. I follow it. I think it's also part of being Puerto Rican. It's like a national sport, politics. But the older I get, the less I want to be, I shouldn't say involved. I am very involved, but the less I want to be maybe in the spotlight. The more I realize how difficult it is. I feel that I can maybe create a better change by focusing on something specific and maybe pushing for that or speaking up when I see some injustice. But in terms of actually being a commissioner or a mayor or in starting positions, I've noticed maybe because I'm also in Miami and the politics here are very interesting, for lack of a better word, but I've noticed I avoid it. I no longer want to pursue a political career in Senate or Congress. Instead, I'm more focused on what are the local issues that need addressing and who do I need to contact. I've also been very careful. It's such different times from when we went to school. Of course, you're younger than I am, but the nation felt divided back then, and now it's a division that is scary and in a way makes me want to be more involved in what is smaller and what I can control instead of what is too big and it's going to be just going to divide us without getting anything done. So I avoided not as much.
Yeah. No, I relate to that a whole lot. I think sometimes I ask myself how much information I would need to be able to even. Again, for me, it's like to the extreme. I'm certainly on the extreme of apolitical, and I go, how much information would I need to have about somebody to endorse them as a person, them as a politician, or how much information would I have to see a policy as really good and beneficial, and then see one as problematic, and all of these things. And like when I assess the opportunity cost. Everything I'd have to give up just to learn about the person or the politician or the policy, I find myself going, there seems to be such a better use of my time than just doing this just to, again, for me, the extreme is, and I'm not even saying my take is good or best. I'm just saying it is where it is right now, and it could change. But I find myself going, there's so many better uses of my time than to get immersed in the game. And so my next few questions are going to be connected to all this, and maybe we'll have some more dialogue about it. But any response to my thoughts right there?
You explained it perfectly. The amount of information. Basically, politics has become a game in which we all accuse each other, and we lack the information to actually be right in
Yes,
the answer that we're
yes, yes,
giving.
yes, yes.
Instead, we're accusing the other person of not caring or not being good or not having our best interest. When in reality, I think we all love where we come from. We all love the
Yeah,
U.S. That's why we live here. We
yeah,
wouldn't be here otherwise. So instead of thinking of the hatred, if we have enough information, we can see the points on the other side. And that lack of information is what has taken me away from the political side. It has also pushed me to get involved in certain areas that I know very well. Immigration is an area that
mm,
I'm vocal over, but understanding, because I feel like the same thing. If people have the information, the approach would be different. And the
yes.
lack of information is what frustrates me very much about current day politics.
Right. And there's moments for me again, and there's moments of hopelessness that I can certainly feel, which is like when I'm having conversations with people that are even educated, and I'm speaking to them and I'm asking questions, and then there's like a realization moment. Hold on, like a lot of what maybe they just communicated is based on an unsound pattern of thought, but it's like again the temptation of hope. I won't call it real hopelessness, maybe a temptation of hopelessness of going, like the idea of people making decisions based on emotion as opposed to fact, or even instincts as opposed to the actual data is puzzling at times. It makes me go, well, if it's all this emotion, then like then what's the point of a real intellectual conversation if it's all emotion anyway? Anyway, so that's where I can get stuck in the process.
We agree.
Um, so,
We
so
agree.
let me ask you, inside of all of this, related to immigration. So one thing that I seem to come across is that immigration seems to be so intertwined with like broader politics, and probably, I mean, realistically, probably one of the hotter topics in the nation when it comes to immigration. So attorneys have shared with me that the policies pushed, by political parties upstream have a massive impact on the immigration policies downstream in the world of helping people become citizens and everything that you're involved with as an immigration attorney. Have you witnessed this the same way, and how do you see all of that?
It's sad because immigration only becomes relevant when it's political, an issue that will divide us. It
Yeah,
doesn't become relevant when we have an agreement, when there's actual change. I'll give you the best example: the Dreamers. The Dreamers were at that moment a movement that I generally thought, okay, this is going to get done. This is something that everyone wants.
yeah.
But because everyone wanted it, it just was not relevant anymore. Let's stop discussing it. Oh, it's in the Supreme Court. It will stay there forever. Nobody mentions it anymore. And that's frustrating. I hate the fact that immigration is used to divide, but it is a topic that even when it comes up, even when it's splitting communities, I think at least we're discussing it, because we need a change in our immigration system. It's very antiquated and it's broken, and it will continue to provide false information, not only here in the U.S., but abroad. That's why we have the crisis that we're living right now at the border, because the message is not clear, because we don't even understand our immigration system.
Hmm.
So that's what's frustrating to me, that it's a topic that it should be discussed regularly. It's essential for our economy, for also our image as a country overall. But it's never discussed unless we can use it as a tool to attack each other, not as a tool for change. And that's what
Mm,
we're lacking. If we can use it as a tool for change, we can find so many benefits in our immigration system that
yeah.
we don't have right now.
So do you find your maybe friends, family, or even peers around you who during the election cycle, like during the every 4 years, or like all of the immigration questions come up more than ever? Is that just what you've seen over the last? It's almost 15 years you've been in immigration.
Yep. 15 years practicing immigration law. And what I've noticed is whenever it's on the news, it's funny you mentioned it. So my husband is from Argentina. So we are an immigrant family. My mom is from Venezuela. I was born in Puerto Rico, my dad from Puerto Rico. It's only when it's an election year that they will ask me questions that sometimes I get bothered, but I assume it's what's going on. For example, my husband recently asked me, "Oh, but is it true that everyone's being allowed through the border?" And I'm like, "Hey, you live with me. We've married for 10 years. Like, you should know that's not how it works. Like, you hear me, you hear when I'm." But that's the type of question that comes up, because that's what he reads in a newspaper, and he assumes, okay, this is true. And that's why also the media is another area that worries me with the information.
Yeah.
These questions always come up, not only during elections, but also when it affects us directly, of course, being a family of immigrants. When somebody might be held up at the airport for whatever reason, and they're like, why is this happening? That's when we discuss it. I'm selfish when it comes to immigration. I think we should discuss it all the time. It's the only way we can change it. But I'm grateful that at least discuss, maybe if it's once every 4 years. But I wish it were discussed more so we could have more information and understand that, no, not everyone can go through the border. That's not how it works. People are stopped. There are laws. It's just how we implement them that sadly changes.
Got it. No, that's it's so fascinating. I appreciate you saying that about husband, because there is, it kind of shows the impact of some of the media. Oh, like, is it like that? Again, he's married to you, so he should have all the information. But the reality is that there's a messaging that comes through, and it sometimes, I mean, even again at San Antonio, we're clearly not on the border, but it makes you wonder, if you're not there, how is it? What is it really like? And again, I think like Elon Musk had a video. I guess he had went and he showed, hey, this is how it looks. And then again, the skeptical thoughts that I have often are like, well, is that one day? Is that all the time? Is that one window of an afternoon where it was busy? Again, all of these things that we don't have full answers to. So I guess, how would you say?
But again, I have the same thing.
Yeah.
Go for it.
How bad would you say it is then? Is it like in a range of like 10 being the worst or 10 being the best and 1 being the worst? How do you view it? Or even maybe you don't even view it like that. Maybe you have another kind of scale or thought process.
So I'm going to put it in context. Sadly, that's my frustration with the media. I remember, so once again, going back to my age, I remember when I trusted everything I saw in the media. Of course, we didn't have social media back then, but everything that I read in the newspapers says this is what it is. I mean, the journalists don't lie to me. And now I find myself that social media has sadly destroyed that. It's been a great tool to connect, a terrible tool to get reliable information.
Yeah.
The border, at least, which is a part of immigration, but the border needs to be put in context. The reality is illegal entries have been going on forever. The crisis at the border is not a new thing. What has made it worse, because I'm not going to deny that it is worse, is the misinformation that social media has provided, not just in the U.S., but mainly abroad. I'll give you the best example. It's very common, and if you ask the people who are making the line at the border, for them to be told, oh, yeah, the president's allowing everyone in, or this, don't worry, this is how it works, when in reality, that's not true. There are laws, you could be expelled, there are consequences. They'll tell you, you're within status because you have a work permit, for example. No, you're not. You're going to be eventually placed in removal proceedings. You will be deported. That ugly side of what could happen is not shared, and it has led to this misinformation and people showing up at the border. Also, we have to put it in context. Yes, things are bad because things in our countries nearby are pretty bad. And sometimes we don't notice because of course, we have to look at our own affairs and take care of our own country.
Yeah.
But things in Nicaragua are bad. Things in Cuba are getting worse by the second. Venezuela. So these are countries that have always been in turmoil, but have reached a level within the last couple of years that is forcing now a large exodus within their border. And it's not just countries nearby. We have people flying to Mexico to try to come to the U.S. Meanwhile, the image of the U.S. abroad, for better or worse, is of this country who remains stable, thank God, and who remains a country who prides itself of being a country built by immigrants. But that's not what's going on. So to answer your question, yes, I do think it's that bad in the border. I think it needs to be put in context as to why this is happening. I think there are solutions available right now that we are not using. Right now, for the first time ever in history, there's a way for you to log in online and get a number, basically, and wait in line to be allowed into the U.S. legally. That is not being promoted as much as it would have been a great tool if people know about it.
Yeah.
It's called CBP1, by the way. Use it. It's great. It's helpful. But because people don't know, they're coming in illegally, and the images that we see at the border are the way to go, when in reality there are better options available that we simply don't, for some reason, don't know about. So let's take advantage of it. Let's spread the word.
Yeah, that's fascinating. No, I appreciate that resource you gave as well for people who are thinking about it from outside the country. Now, the question I had for you is, um, do immigration attorneys, especially on the election years, do you guys see an I mean, with how the border is now, do you guys see so much more business, or really the people coming across the border are really out of resources, so they couldn't even pay for the legal support to go through the proper channels and proper process to become a citizen?
Election years are always busy for people who want to become citizens. And that's actually, I mean, I admit as an immigration attorney, every time there's an election, I promote for my clients who are qualified to apply for citizenship,
Yeah.
because the government will probably move them faster. The administration wants these new voters. And you remember who was the president when you became a citizen, and you're probably going to vote for that person if you have the chance. So election year is always a good time to apply for citizenship. Now, when it comes to the border, right now, immigration attorneys, right now in March of 2024, immigration attorneys are overwhelmed, but that's because the fees will be increasing for all immigration applications most in April 1st. So we're all rushing to submit the applications before the April 1st deadline, but that's unrelated to the elections. The elections tend to, we hire the new president who might bump up the fees, might lower them. Fees are typically what pushes the immigration in terms of people applying. Now, in the border, what we have noticed, sadly, people who've spent a significant amount of money with a coyote to help them come to the border, and once they get here, immigration is not like criminal law in which you have the privilege of having an attorney that may be assigned to represent you. You have to pay for the attorney out of pocket. The reality is that people can choose to represent yourself, but the numbers are incredibly sad when you look at the amount of people that lose their cases by representing themselves, and people when when they have an attorney. These are very complicated cases. They can be expensive. I'm not gonna minimize it. That's why I made that joke about how attorney life may seem glamorous, but sometimes it's not. Because when you really want to do what's best for certain parts of the community, yeah, you're not gonna be driving a Bentley. So you have to find that balance. I feel like I have to find that balance of wanting to represent people who are essential for economy and for a country, and men might not be able to afford us. So it's an issue with the border, and that's why I try to promote other ways to come in legally, who are cheaper and are better for us overall.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I did want to ask you about one piece of what you brought up. You brought up people who get their citizenship under a certain president. You think there's this trend of they will often continue voting for that one president. There is talk, I won't give any validity to it, but there's talk when it comes to the immigration, like, oh, one of the reasons that they're letting so many people in the country is so that they can vote in these states where the ID isn't required or whatever it is. Do you have those conversations with people as far as like who are theorizing about this happening, and what's your take on all that?
Yes, I do sadly have these conversations. I mean, I shouldn't say sadly. It's a good conversation to have. Yeah. So I can clarify that to become a citizen, there's some elections that you may be able to vote locally, depending on the jurisdiction, if you are here without status. Okay, understand that's a local election. Most of the local elections tend to be nonpartisan. They're more for the commissioner who will help the lower level positions. The higher ups, the higher positions, the ones that will be making the policy that will affect the nation, the president, Congress, Senate, those, in any election, you have to be a citizen. Keep that in mind, because sometimes when we are at certain events, you might be a resident and somebody will promote, hey, register to vote. And you do so because you don't understand. And then later when you apply for citizenship, this could have serious consequences. You could be deported if you registered to vote and you were not a U.S. citizen. On average, it takes a person 5 years from the day they become a resident to become a U.S. citizen. So it is unreasonable for me to say, okay, the people that are being allowed in to support a political party, because it will take them at least 5 years if they are able to get the residency from that day to be able to vote. 5 years, it's a new administration, it's a new election year. Yeah. So I don't see how that carries much weight. Also, understand that the people that are being allowed in, most of them, if not all, well, most of them are being forced to seek asylum. Asylum is a slow process. It's a couple years before you even get to the first stage. So it will be most likely more than 5 years before you can get any status that will lead you to vote and actually make a difference in the politics in the country. So I try to shut down the argument because it doesn't make much sense. Now, if we want to say we're trying to bring people in to boost the economy in certain areas, yes, I could see how that would work. It's just a matter of messaging too. How is it boosting the economy? Where can the people go? But I don't think that is not being talked about as much as it should be, so that people can appreciate immigration, streamlining as it should be. But now it's a bit of a free for all.
And unpack asylum, resident, and citizen. I've probably been explained it probably 7 times. Or maybe 20. Who knows? One, I always want to refresh my understanding of it. But yeah, so unpack those real quick.
First, I'll start distinguishing what is a refugee and an asylee. A refugee comes from a country that has already been determined that there's a set amount of number of people that will be allowed in. They will be set in a specific place, and they're coming because there's a need. The best example I can give is Sudan. The Lost Boys of Sudan, they were refugees. They determined there was a crisis in Sudan. They came in. They already had their homes. They were already set up. Those are the numbers that we hear sometimes. The president will accept X amount of refugees. That's been determined already. Asylees are different. Asylees are people who are running away from a circumstance in their country, and they're looking for a country to take them in. During the Trump administration, this was better explained by it was a new requirement for asylum, that you had to seek asylum in the countries that you visited, maybe on your way to the U.S., in a way to take the burden off the U.S. and also to have neighboring countries either step up their game and stop being corrupt and be more welcoming to immigrants, so the U.S. wouldn't have to be the only country doing so. So that's the way asylum works. Also interesting to know about asylum, you can't seek asylum, at least until recently. You wouldn't be able to apply from your country. You had to apply at the U.S. So that's what led to sadly, a lot of illegal immigration, because people have to get to the U.S. to apply. Now, for the first time ever, we have the option of getting in line online. You can apply remotely using the application, and they will tell you, now it's your turn, show up at the border, present your case. That's asylum. Once you win an asylum case, which can take years, while your case is pending, you're in the U.S. legally. You have a work permit, you're okay. Eventually, you will have either a hearing before a judge or an interview, and that will determine if you're going to get residency or not. Asylum is not based on how difficult the things are in your country. It's based on your personal circumstances. So sadly, it's not enough to say things are tough, we can't eat, if your neighbor can't eat and no one else can eat. Then that's a nationwide problem. If you're saying I can't eat because I have this political idea or my religion or this sexual orientation, then that's a basis for asylum. But then you have to prove it. So that's asylum. Residency is different. Residency is what you may acquire from an asylum, but residency can be acquired from your family, from your employment, and there are visas ranging, now a whole alphabet soup, from A to V as in Victor. Literally, we're not creative in immigration. They're called visa A, visa B. So these visas are the way to get in and then later on seek that residency. Citizenship is the final goal that most people want. I say most because some of us don't want to pay taxes, so maybe want to remain as residents or some other circumstance where we don't want to be citizens. But that will take a while, and that's the final step in every immigration journey.
Nice. No, I appreciate that. Taking us to school real quick. No, thank you for that breakdown.
It's difficult, but I try to make it simple.
Right. So let me ask you, one thing that we probably all seen is there's probably a wide variety of approaches that anybody has online. But let's stay in the lane of attorneys for a moment. There are attorneys who are very upfront about their politics online, showcasing their advocacy, very, very bold. Then there's other attorneys on the other end who never really show which party they align with. And sometimes when I'm talking to some friends, I'll say, hey, there's the LeBron approach and there's the Jordan approach. Jordan is like, you never really knew where he aligned. And LeBron, we know a whole lot more about who he aligns with or what he represents or causes he's pushing. Of course, Jordan has that famous line that, Republicans buy shoes too. But all of that to say is, what has been your approach with whether it's your online persona and branding, or even just even your personal online branding, or even with people in general? How have you decided to go about all of that?
So I originally tried to be as neutral as possible. And I do that because, I have my views. I can't shut up and dribble. I am very outspoken. So when it came to my island in particular, I've noticed people who, and I'm going to tie it back to something you mentioned at the beginning, information. People who didn't have information about some political issue in my island will have an opinion, and it would drive me insane because I would think you don't know what you're talking about. You haven't lived there, or you don't understand. So I've always tried to be neutral, try to listen. I also have good friends all over, from the Republican side, Democrats, and even in local politics with very different views
Yeah.
that I can respect, I can listen to and respect. What I've noticed lately is, sadly, during the Trump administration, there were some things, and I apologize if you hear my dog going crazy in the
It's okay.
background. She's but during, during the Trump administration, sadly, there were some policies that I couldn't stay quiet any longer. The Muslim ban was one that was very difficult for me to understand. During the Stay in Mexico program that was known as MPP, the American Protection Program, it was very difficult for me to stay quiet. I had clients getting kidnapped while they were waiting in Mexico. It was very frustrating. So I became a little bit more vocal than I was on social media. And that led to some stations. I've noticed it's sometimes difficult to find a woman who would be willing to give her opinion on politics. And it's just difficult. In South Miami and South Florida, I don't know if the rest of the United States, South Florida, it's particularly a Hispanic woman. So I found myself all of a sudden being asked to appear in some talk shows in which politics was an issue. And I didn't stop being as quiet or as neutral. And I tried to go back. If you ever have a chance to see it in my interviews in Spanish, you'll see that even as, I'll admit it, I'm a very liberal Democrat, but I try to remain neutral in my responses and see how the other side may feel, or why they say certain things, or why some policies are pushed, and sometimes even agree with them. But now it's not as undercover, as hidden as it was back in the day. Trump changed everything after that.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. And then, so is that similar? Again, you're talking to somebody who knows so little about the political arena, but I'm more curious. I think there is that proper etiquette. I think we were taught along the way, which is, hey, don't bring up religion, don't bring up politics. But I've probably built one being very active in church over the last 20 years. That's like, especially at a church that's big on like recruiting and doing all of that. So like that's never been the case. But on the politics side, I think I've probably been more quiet about it. But more recently, I found myself just wanting to be more curious, ask people questions, ask people their approach, and so again, like the ignorance to the point of not even knowing, like which states are kind of like are what, and then like now that I'm asking questions, I'm learning. Okay, Florida's like that. How would I have known? So then, what is that like? Maybe with your political position, and then being in Florida, which is, I guess, it's called a red state, and then yeah.
So in a way, this is what I wish more people were willing to ask questions. Like, I am curious. I want to understand. I'll give you a good example. Here we have in South Florida, Miami in particular, we have a large Cuban community. Cuban communities are known to be conservative. They're known to support the Republican Party. And I am curious. I like to ask, why are you, why disbelief? Why support certain policies? Even in my own family, my sister-in-law, for example, she's from Chile, but she has mentioned to me, knowing sometimes how many immigrants come in and take our jobs, and I have to be like, what do you mean our job? Like, we're all immigrants. But I'm curious, like, okay, what do you say? Like, what do you mean? What I've noticed is when we have these conversations, they only work if the person's willing to have the conversation. And sometimes what happens is I'll get the statement that's a fact, as a conclusion, and when I ask the question, I get a defensive response. I go, this is how it is. So I'm not really learning as much as I would like. I would like to. We know history. We know the mistakes that the Kennedy administration may have done, but we also know what's going on now, the way the Cuban community may have been treated during certain programs by various administrations. So I'm always wanting to understand, like you do, why people feel a certain way, or if they even understand why they support certain things. And it's not that easy to have that conversation, at least here in Miami, here in South Florida. I've noticed it's easier for me to have that conversation sometimes with somebody from another state. And that's why I'm able to see how New York may be leaning a certain way, how they feel a certain way, or people in California, Texas is a great example. But Florida tends to be a little bit closer in terms of not wanting to discuss it. It's more a fact. This is how I feel. Done. This is what I've been taught, and that's it. Yeah. So the lack of the discussion is what I wish the state overall would push more. Not for it to change. Maybe it will stay the same. It's fine if we're supposed to be purple, but yeah, pretty much red. It's fine if it stays red. I just want to understand it better instead of simply getting the quotes and statements that are thrown out and not analyzed in any way.
Right. I think there is maybe a rigidity. I think in my own mind is like, and maybe it's my mom's doing, and maybe I remember like using foul language when I was a kid, and my mom would be like, "Do you know what that word means?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know what it means." She's like, her correction wasn't even don't use the bad language, but if you're gonna use it, know what it means, boy. Like that was her, her parenting approach, and so I found, and maybe that's a core memory for a reason, right? Where I go, whatever I believe, if I have my conclusion, in my head, I gotta have 3 or 4 reasons why I come to the conclusion. I can't memorize the conclusion if I don't memorize the reasons. Like they all go together. Now I realize most people aren't like that. They'll memorize the conclusion and then not the reasons. And then I ask the reasons, and I'm like, so how could you hold on to and memorize your conclusion, but then all of your reasons are just pretty much, you can't even find them inside your own head. And so anyway, I mentioned all of that. One, to say the idea of discussion has been really, really refreshing. Again, even this interview, I remember even as I sent you the questions, I was like, again, generally what we're going to talk about. I was wondering, she may not want to even bring up anything political, because some people, that is the brand. It's very apolitical. Yeah. But all of that to say... I
have to say I'm LeBron. I like that analysis. I like that. I'm going to compare myself to LeBron from now on.
There is... so you brought up Cuba and who they're traditionally conservative. How would you assess Puerto Rico? I know you mentioned being Puerto Rican, and then, of course, being in Miami. I feel like there's a Puerto Rican connection there. What would you... What are Puerto Ricans generally, or what's the mix that you've observed over the years?
I'm going to generalize here, but I think in Puerto Rico it's very influenced by exposure. Sadly, we don't get to vote we're a colony, so we don't get to vote for the president in any way. But the Democratic Party has primaries in Puerto Rico. We don't have Republican primaries. That minor detail of primaries in Puerto Rico for a particular party gives that party exposure. So the fact that we know about this party, the candidates come to the island, we get to see them, has made the island lean a certain way. The island also has a lot of influence from immigrants. It's an island, and we're very proud to say that we're the key to the Americas because of where we're located. So because we have that influence from Cubans that live in the island, the Haitian community, Venezuela, when you come from countries that are going through turmoil, you tend to, I've noticed around me, they tend to view the Republican Party, for example, as a party that takes action, the party that will stop this from happening. And lately, more with the narrative that, once again, the conclusions without the information, without the facts, there's this crazy notion that Democrats are supposed to be communists and that they're supposed to be aligned with Venezuelan views or Cuban views, which are not really Venezuelan or Cuban views, they're dictatorships. So we have both. But when it comes to the essence of true Puerto Ricans, I've noticed they tend to be more democratic, mainly because that's the party that has the exposure in the island, the one that goes and we don't see you. We'll see you on TV, but we like to see you inland. We like to see you with us. So that's why Puerto Ricans, in my opinion, tend to be Democrats, while the people that move into Puerto Rico, that's where you have more of a mix.
Fascinating. No, that's good information. I think it's good. It's good to hear. I know when we went too, I was like wanting to ask my in-laws about stuff, and I'm like, okay, hey, how much? Again, like it's with anybody. You go. How much of that etiquette am I willing to break, just for my own curiosity? But it's good information to know. Like, hey, what have you what have you seen and kind of but not only what you've seen, like broad strokes, but also some of the explanation of, hey, you think it's because of that representation, people, the politicians visiting the islands, and in the primary, which again I wouldn't even know what that is, but it seems to be something that connects political people to the island. So maybe a quick unpacking of a primary. How would you explain that to somebody who doesn't know?
First, with your in-laws, if you ask the question just broadly, as I mentioned, for us, for Puerto Ricans, especially old school Puerto Ricans, politics, it's a sport. Like, we enjoy it. We like discussing it. We like debating it. We like it, which is why I'm always asking questions. If you ask the question just as you asked me, so which party do you think the island belongs to? Oh, it's great. It will lead to a great discussion. You can learn more. So ask. It's a great question too. Lively discussion. You'll enjoy it. Now, primaries. They were going on until recently. I mean, they're still going on in some states. Primaries are the first elections that the parties will have to pick their leaders. So we had primaries up until recently to pick Donald Trump as the candidate for the Republican Party. We had primaries, believe it or not, also for Joe Biden, although the party knew that he was going to be the nominee. So Hillary Clinton, that campaign is the best example of the last primary that you could really feel in the island. She went personally to the island to campaign. And back then, I could feel the island being interested in who is Bernie Sanders, because the primary was going to go on, and it happened in Puerto Rico back then because there was actually somebody to choose from for the Democratic Party. The Republican Party had somebody to choose from, but Puerto Rico just simply doesn't have, and it's a decision the party has to not hold primaries in the island. So that's what a primary is. The first step to pick.
Oh, I got it. Okay, there we go. Let me ask you, connecting back to the conversation we started a little while ago, which was, you mentioned that under Trump's administration, I think, some of the policies, there was so much dissonance, maybe in your soul, in what you saw, maybe what was right, and then what was being done. So you say, hey, I'm actually going to be more vocal about my disagreement and my viewpoint on this. So would you say you've kind of pulled back since that time to now? Have you pulled back some of that that approach as far as that intensity, or you would say no, you kind of stayed steady in that same amount of intensity as you had back then?
I tried, but once again, here in the Hispanic media in South Florida, there are not as many women willing to be vocal and speak for, at least for the Democratic views or Democratic Party in particular. So what I noticed is, although I tried to step back and simply now continue my life as an immigration lawyer, I was asked to sometimes still go to certain shows or certain debates that were in the media to discuss or to defend anything that may have been done or why the Democratic Party was doing certain things. And I have no relation with the Democratic Party at all. I simply do immigration law and have my opinion. But because I had started being so vocal during the Trump administration, that has continued, maybe to a lesser extent, but it has continued now with the Biden administration. And it seems that it may continue. And I do enjoy it. I enjoy it because I do get to debate with really smart people and learn the other side, understand it better, get that perspective. I just sometimes wish that politics would be viewed more of a let's back it up with substance and actual information instead of simply disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing.
Right. It is interesting too when when I'm watching I don't know, being in South Florida, like the PPD podcast or like Valuetainment, you're familiar with them?
You're familiar with them? Yeah, I'm familiar, but from my other friends who will send them to me, be like, check this out. So that's how I learn.
So, but it's interesting when I hear, like, let's say they're having a debate, and then like the crowd is getting hype about something. I'm like, why is the crowd getting hype about this point? Like, they haven't soundly supported the argument yet. They just mentioned something emotional. But again, it's just kind of just the way some of it is at times.
Yeah.
So
a lot of emotion.
So let me ask you about how you've witnessed so being in immigration, like, how have you witnessed like the contrast in the impact that each party has had on the system? And maybe my more specific question under this is, which is there a party where you would say this party seems to care more about a person than another one? And if so, like, again, if you have an answer to that question, why is your perspective that way?
I think both parties care about the nation. Both parties obviously care about the United States. They care about it. The way they show it is different, sadly.
Yeah.
So, and instead of communicating and trying to be like, okay, this is the benefit of the United States, they're like, this is my way, done, dead. For example, the U.S. has limited resources, like any nation. We have limited resources.
Yeah.
So when the Migrant Protection Program was implemented, which, by the way, was a program that forced all asylees, anyone who was seeking asylum, had to wait in Mexico before coming to the U.S. When that program was implemented, I understood. I didn't agree with it. I didn't agree with it at all. But I understood that President Trump was doing it to control the border, control a high amount of migration coming in, limited resources. This is a way to deter because we have to control our resources. Understood it, didn't agree with it, but understand it. When it comes to the Democrat side, I do agree with the humane side of being welcoming, but I also wish we had a little bit more of I guess I would call it Republican structure of understanding if we're going to allow people in, how are we going to do it? Let's be uniform in how we do it. And we want to have a heart, we want to have a soul, we want to be nice to the immigrant coming in, but there needs to be structure. And that's where both parties have their flaws. You have one that is no one in, that's it. If people are taking over and you accuse the immigrant who's coming for a better life, or even the immigrant who is an entrepreneur, successful, coming to open a business, you put them all in the same bucket and you accuse them of crimes that haven't fathom. Yeah. And then on the other side, being too lenient, in Spanish there's a saying, pagan justos por pecadores, the fair will pay for the sinners. So by being too lenient and not having a structure, it looks like a broken immigration system because maybe families one is being processed, a spouse is being processed one way, and another is being processed differently because of the lack of structure in the border. The lack of structure makes things slower. Yes, people will have to wait to come in, but it's needed. So not failing to meet in the middle is the issue that we have. That's what leads to different treatment.
I think the longer you talk, I'm like, yeah, she needs to be in politics. Like, put her over there.
I joke with my husband that Uncle Joe never calls me for my opinion, and I wish he did. But if he did, and I can assure you, if you speak with any immigration attorney, I shouldn't say any, but most immigration attorneys that do what I do and who see asylum cases on a regular basis, but at the same time are working on investor visas or an artist visa, most of us think the same. There needs to be a balance. Uniformity would be essential and it would be helpful.
Yeah, gotcha. Now, the vibe or the spirit with immigration attorneys, does it seem as though people are preparing for a change in presidential party, or people are going, we're going to probably stay the same? Or is there a lean or hunches among immigration attorneys about what's about to happen in the next 4 years?
It's a wave. So Miami-Dade, although we are in Florida, which is a Republican state, Miami-Dade has always been considered like the Democratic hub. And lately we've been noticing that maybe for the first time in a while, we might not be a Democratic county. Maybe we'll change to a Republican county. So that's a big change. And maybe we're thinking, okay, then maybe that will mean that we'll go back to the old ways, the old administration. But then we remember when Trump won and everyone was thinking, Clinton has this, and we woke up to a completely different outcome. I always have that in the back of my head. So, and then we remember, once again, I'm in Florida. We remember Bush versus Gore and how we were started that amazing election. So because of that, we go in waves. There are days that we're like, okay, let's get ready for a very strict border closure, and other days that we're like, okay, let's get ready to help our clients who are being allowed in and have no idea what to do now. So I don't know. I really don't know. I've come to the point that I no longer trust what I read in the newspaper like I used to when I was a teenager.
Yes. Same. I know. I feel like I'm just the ultimate skeptic now. But like anything, like I don't believe any. It's very difficult to believe a lot of stuff. Now let me see here. Oh, so here's a question for you. I've heard like comedians tease about this idea when it comes to immigration, but it's this idea of when people who have like a clear lineage of immigration, maybe even if it's their parents were immigrants or their grandparents were immigrants, or like even especially close. Does it surprise you when you meet people who have that lineage in their background, but they seem to be like anti-immigration?
My own family is a good example. Like I mentioned, I'm very proud to be married to my Argentine husband. My husband's brother is married to a wonderful girl from Chile. My sister-in-law is the first person who is very anti-immigration. She's actually very proud of it. She's very proud of we want to control the borders so that people don't, common statements will be, so that they don't take our jobs. Which to me, sometimes it's shocking because, of course, I consider myself, although I'm very proudly Puerto Rican, I consider myself an immigrant. And I have to remind her, like, what do you mean our jobs? Immigrant jobs, or what's going on here? And then I see my nieces and nephews, and English is their first language. So there's that distance. And I think it's not that we forget where we come from. It's more what we are fed once we're here. We lack the understanding of what are the people that are coming in, what are they doing? The reality is people that are coming, at least most of the people that are coming in legally are coming because they're creating businesses, they're helping the economy, and those are immigrants. So they're not taking our jobs, they're giving us jobs. And the people that may be regularly through the border, the actual numbers show that they are, once they are put to work, and that's the big deal, put to work. Once they are given the opportunity to work, they have been an asset to the economy. What we see is there's certain places like New York is the best example of the severe consequences of not giving immigrants the ability to work. They have to wait a certain amount of time to apply for a work permit once you enter, and that's an issue. That's when you become a burden. That lack of knowledge as to how the immigration system works, how long it takes, when are you a burden, when do you help, and your own background is what's creating that disconnect in their own immigrant community, in which now there's an anti-immigrant sentiment because we are reading something as a fact without understanding where it came from or what led to that.
Yeah.
Lack of information.
Right. And it's one of those conversations that again I've been asking myself. There's a statement in the therapeutic world when it's talking about withholding value statements. I think it's a value statement on any one thing until you can do it soundly, like and you'll hear it the phrase or the sentiment when people are going, oh, is that bad or is it different? Like, so before we say good or bad, again, so when I was asking myself about the whole perspective of something that those of us and it's I suppose the thought is all of us are from that lineage, unless you're like again have a lineage again of indigenous purebloods that I guess none of y'all. So there's that perspective. The other one is the opportunity, the times when I've had a privilege in my past. Do I believe that just because I had a privilege, that means that, or even if it was something, a privilege that I shouldn't have had, do I think everybody should have it as well? So anyway, there's this whole conversation about, but I do find myself having the thought exercise and asking, is it wild in and of itself to be an immigrant and then to be anti-immigration? It's kind of like that whole idea.
Here in Miami, sadly, it's very common.
Very common.
It's something that we're seeing a lot. Yes, it's a common phenomenon.
And now, do you have conversations with maybe immigration attorneys from other places? I know you mentioned briefly earlier that there's some other countries that you're aware of, their immigration practices and difficulty or ease in other places. What have you learned, again, in finding out details and facts about how immigration is elsewhere, and how does that make you even see how we have it here?
once again, my husband's Argentinian, so of course
Yeah.
I thought like maybe I should be Argentine, although I don't have the accent. Maybe I should try. And there I learned that to be Argentine, which is why they have such a large migrant community from Bolivia, Paraguay, and other countries, they need to show that they've lived in that country for a year. That's the requirement. Now, I also learned because when people were coming from certain places, maybe they walked by Argentina, unlikely, but some did. And I had to ask, did you seek asylum or seek any residency in Argentina? I also have to ask now because if you're going to seek asylum in the U.S., you cannot have residency in any other country because that's the whole point, that you can't live anywhere else, that you fear for your life. That's why you're coming to the U.S. So I've been able to ask, how did you get status here? How easy it is to get it. In some countries, like Mexico, it's more of a money transaction. Canada is very interesting to me because Canada is one of those countries in which I confess, particularly my clients from Nicaragua, that are able to show persecution based on the country conditions and not to them directly. I admit that I sometimes do encourage them to check out the Canadian immigration system because it does tend to focus more on what are the circumstances in your country and what are you going to be doing here. And that's an approach that I wish the U.S. Had. I can understand why they might be reluctant to take it on because it would lead to a very large migration, but it would be legal migration to the U.S. So that's Canada is, in my opinion, my favorite in terms of how they handle immigration. Europe is interesting because Europe has both the law of people that you were not born here, but your great, 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 great grandfather, and you can show it and you have the lineage. That's how you may get status. And in other places, which is why Brexit was so interesting, it was more of how long have you been there? Have you been working? Did you work there for a certain amount of time? You've been working here legally for a certain amount of time, then we can give you status, which is why Brexit was a big deal because they were like, okay, well, once we're in Brexit and we're no longer part of the European Union, people who are here will lose, or not lose, but won't be able to get it. So that's why a lot of people left Britain back then. So each country has their own way. Europe, for example, is very strict. If you don't have status, you're not going to be able to work, which is different from the U.S., in which we have a lot of people without status, but the need for employment is so large, and we also don't have the best work ethic that we'd end up hiring anyone, even if they don't have the status. That wouldn't fly in Europe. So it's interesting to see how things work in other countries, what we can implement here, and how we can maybe be more flexible in a fair and firm way at the same time. Sounds contradictory, but believe me, I think it can be done. I just hope Uncle Joe calls me and I'll tell him, like, Joe, this is how we should do it. But it is good. Your question is very valid because if we look at how other countries do it, not every country is perfect, and every country knows that they have limited resources. We can implement some things here, and it's a very outdated system.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it is interesting when you bring up topics like this, and I could see the counter argument of saying, well, then you have to assess how good that other country is. Again, how is their economy, or how is their, you have to go out all of these questions. So let's say one country does it really well, but then like we look at them and go, well, we don't like their economy is bad, or all these other things are bad, and which things are, again, causation, that's caused because of their immigration, or no, it's just, there might be some correlation, but it's not necessarily causation. But it does get into all of that because it could be simple, as an outsider, ignorant guy who doesn't really know much, but then just going, oh, well, yeah, why don't we just take those policies from that place and then the ones from this place and put them all together and yay, it's fixed. But the reality of the complexities of situations are probably way deeper than just a surface level assessment,
Absolutely. The Argentina example that I gave you, you'll hear experts that will tell you that's the reason why the country has been having issues, because they give anyone status after a year. Meanwhile, for a year, people are living illegally. So it does have a legitimate argument. Britain back then for Brexit was able to use countries like Greece and what they were going through to show it's because you have such a large immigrant community and you're not controlling it, that's where you're poor. So you are right. To properly evaluate it, you have to look at the totality. That's why I go back to Canada, because I really like that. Their system, I think, is very fair, at least in the asylum aspect.
Yeah.
And the main criticism when I ask my clients, why do you want to go to Canada? It's because it's cold, which I find funny.
Oh, that's
Okay.
wild.
So,
Let me
but
ask
it
you
is.
a follow-up question that I was like, it's burning in the back of my mind. You said it earlier. You talked about the fee difference between one season to another, whether it's now to April 1st, you said, and then you mentioned a fee
Yeah.
could change during a different administration as well. What's the range on that fee? Is there like well, one, clarify what the fee is connected to, and then what's that range in that price as far as how it goes up and down?
So the fees are what you would pay to get a visa, to get status, to apply for residency, depending on the category. In terms of range, the applications are never free. The only application that was free was the asylum application, and that will tie to your range question. That the new regulations will actually start charging for asylum $600. We go from free to $600. So the range can be from 3%, 5% to 600%. Literally, that's how dramatic it is. What we've seen now is the increases in the applications are ranging from 10 to 30% on the average applications. That will be starting April 1st. So it's good for everyone to apply now. And it's for everything. For example, a very common category are the visas for employment. When you're coming to work, some of them are going up. Some applications to make your application go faster. Believe me, there's an application to make your application go faster.
Yeah.
That also is going up. So all these fees vary, and the administration does have a lot to do with it. For example, during the Obama administration, the Department of Homeland Security became a bit self-funded. Everyone was applying, and they didn't have to worry about increasing taxes or where are we going to get money. It was coming from the applications, and they were doing well. Trump administration started using these fees to actually investigate the applications a little bit further. And it's understandable. Yeah, you may want to investigate more if the marriage is legitimate, if it's a marriage application or whoever may be applying. But when you investigate, the funds drain. So there was talk about increasing fees, and that's what we're seeing now, that during those investigations, and now we're trying to catch up with all the applications that were left behind, the fees are going up. So they might be 10% increase, they might be 30%, or it might be a application that was free now having a very significant fee.
Wow. Great information. That's interesting. Now, maybe one question before the final one is the whole busing situation. I guess the busing again. I hear about these things. You might know more validity stuff than I do. I'm giving you, I guess what they call is I'm basing it off of headlines. You might have some more research done as far as the actual article itself. So the idea, if I understood some of it right, is that Texas is busing immigrants to cities who are like, oh yeah, if I was Texas, we would support them and we would help them. And then Texas governor, whoever it was like, all right, well, we'll send them to you guys so y'all can do that. And then I guess it's something like, oh, New York was like, never mind, like this is too difficult. We're gonna go bankrupt. But anyway, what's your again, correct any of what I just said because I just gave a very elementary version. But what's your perspective? What's your thoughts on it? What is it? And any perspective at all?
It's great that we're talking about it because that is a type of policy that you can see both sides. If you look at it objectively, you can look at Governor Abbott and be like, well, it makes sense. You have limited resources. People are coming in large amounts. You can't sustain it. You want to send the message that this is a lot. Let's send it to New York, who said, oh, it would be nice to them. Okay, then you handle them. So you can see that perspective. You can also see the cruel side of somebody showing up and being told, oh, get in this bus, we're going to take you somewhere. And all of a sudden you wake up and you're on the other side, up north. You have no idea where you are for a while. And also the point of discussing it. When it happened originally, because Florida has also been doing that, we send many migrants to Martha's Vineyard in particular. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because they consider it a liberal area and they want to. It's going back to the division instead of an actual reason. It's more of to keep fighting.
Where is Martha's Vineyard?
Up in Boston, like
it's in Boston.
the New England
got
area.
it. Now you got it. There was a headline about the governor of Florida saying that he's going to send the Haitian people there, I think.
Oh yeah, that has been going on. The governor of Florida works closely with the governor in Texas to have this going on. Now what he's going to do is actually do it in Florida because anyone from Haiti, based on the turmoil that's going on there, they will be coming on via boat. So that's expected to happen. So I understand the reason why you bus, but I also understand that cruel side, where the person that arrives and all of a sudden wakes up in somewhere else.
Yeah.
The issue is, I wish we continue talking about it. Instead, it happened. New York says, "Oh, I don't have resources for this," but we don't talk about it. We don't discuss it. The reality is, there's no resources because these individuals cannot work. They show up and they have to wait 6 months from the time they apply for asylum. It's not an automatic application. 6 months to get a work permit. So yes, you do become a burden. You don't have a home. You don't have any income. You are living on the street. That part is not discussed. Nobody mentions why. Why is it an issue? Why is it a burden? New York says, I don't have the funds, but why? And we don't push Congress because it's not going to change unless Congress passes a law allowing people to apply for work permits right away. We don't push Congress for that. We just say, this is bad. They're a burden. Let's discuss. Similarly, when it happened, originally, many attorneys thought this is human trafficking. You are lying to somebody, telling them, get on this bus, get on this plane, and they're waking up someplace else. They don't know where they are. It's trafficking. You're moving bodies. And we thought, okay, let's push it. Let's discuss it. No, let's instead fight with each other. And these are people. This is not cattle. These are individuals who had a very long, dangerous journey to get here, and you're putting them in even greater danger. The fact that you're asking me, I love it because we're talking about it. At least we're talking about it, and we can understand why they're doing it, but we need to also understand why is it a burden? Why is it a problem? And how can we fix it instead of simply saying, here you go, New York, have a good day, and have New York freak out because they can't handle it. A lot.
Yeah. No, that's good. No, I appreciate your perspective. And I appreciate, the angle that you brought up of the trafficking for sure. I think, you hear certain trigger words and you're like, oh, like, nobody wants to be associated with that or what it's like for the people. Like, again, like even putting yourself in somebody's like that shoes, again, like of getting on the bus, like, in my head, it was like, oh, so they didn't tell them? They didn't tell them, hey, where we're taking y'all? They're just, driving somewhere. That is crazy.
No. And goes back also to how people pay consequences. The main reason why the announcement happened recently for our governor in Florida that he's going to bus Haitians in particular to Martha's Vineyard, the locations are being chosen out of spite. But the community is being targeted because recent boats coming illegally from Haiti have had weapons, have had drugs. So everyone's paying consequences of the governor taking this action. He has already been involved in Texas. And once again, I get why a local government will say, I can't handle this. I'm going to send you away. I just don't understand why we don't do it in a fair way. Why are we not discussing it? And why are we not addressing the real issue, which is the fact that we're allowing them in, but not allowing immigrants to work. That's the main issue. So it is a good topic. I wish people talked about it more.
Yeah. So I guess we're doing our part. I'm doing my part over here. Raising some conversations. Yeah. Well, good. Well, Isa, tell people where to find you. If they could go anywhere to support you, do you want them to go to your Instagram or your website or any of the above? Or you want to send money to your Cash App? I don't know. Let them know what to do for you.
Well, if you're ever in Miami, stop by, give us a call, and we'll love to hang out and take you out. But luckily, immigration is federal law, so I can go anywhere. So if you want to follow our firm and what we're doing, social media is tough for me. I'm trying to work around it. But you can always check out our Instagram. It's Isa Law Firm. I'm not very creative with names, so it's my name, my nickname, Isa Law Firm, which is also the name of our law firm. So check us out. We have a website, Isa Lawyers, and you'll get to know more about me and my staff. And we really do have a great all-female, all-immigrant team. I would love for you guys to get to know us better. And we're here in Miami, but we can go see you wherever you might be and represent you wherever you might be. Immigration is good. It's actually good. So we can change it and make it better.
Hey, represent. Appreciate that, Isa. And everybody listening, just so you all know, I gave Isa the invitation so we could do some more in-person interviews with the studio behind me. But anyway, if you all can share this episode, it would mean a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in. Isa, thank you so much for your time. And we'll see everybody on the next episode.